This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, Relmar McConnell Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We're proudly coming to you through the ever-expanding X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net, and can also be found on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring the Otherworld. Every shamanic practice uses the shamanic trance to enter the Otherworld. Identified differently by various societies, the concept is the same. I've studied and become fairly proficient in many shamanic traditions, from Lakota, Seneca, Choctaw, and Arapaho to Celtic, Tibetan, and Khor. In each instance, the Otherworld is visited through the shamanic journey to do everything from divination to healing. The Otherworld of each tradition has much in common, but also varies. For instance, when training in Tibetan shamanism, I encountered blue-skinned and many-armed gods and goddesses on journey. Unfamiliar with Tibetan deities, I was puzzled. When I asked my teacher about them, he assured me they were Tibetan divinities, very appropriate messengers for the work at hand. When working in the Celtic way, I visited the land of the fairy folk and was amazed to run into my mother, who'd crossed years before. She told me things I didn't know at the time, but was later able to verify. I came to believe that the power animals, helping spirits, gods and goddesses, as well as the landscape and structures I encountered in the Otherworld, are simply metaphorical representations of what's occurring at the quantum level of life. These metaphors are received by the imagination in order to be transferred to and interpreted by the linear mind. Many of the allegories are cultural, based in the greater subconscious of the local populace. Nice, tidy, and fairly accurate explanation, no? But what about my mother? I know she crossed. I was at her deathbed and helped her to the other side. What the heck was she doing in the Celtic land of fairy folk, all but dancing with a green man? We do have Celtic ancestry, but still. Was she a ghost, a helping spirit, or a metaphor? If she was allegorical, how could she tell me things about her life I had no way of knowing? Numerous times I found myself in hidden chambers of the pyramids on the Gaza Strip. I've never studied that form of shamanism, and know for a fact I don't have a drop of Egyptian blood. Granted, I visited the pyramids when I was 12. Although I was able to go deep into the structure on tour, I sure didn't see the places, things, and activities presented in my shamanic journeys. When working as a shamanic practitioner, I'm able to narrate the journey. I record the session and give the recording to my client. On one particular journey, I was taken under the Sphinx into a cavernous chamber where I stood on a large mosaic like a mandala in the middle of the floor. Things started swirling around, and I realized I was being taken back in time. My client's healing ended up being a past life session, after which I sent him on his way with his recording. The next day he showed up at my office saying, "Gwilda, you have got to hear this." We listened to the recording. At the exact point in the journey when I said, "I'm going transtemporal," the recording sped up until it was going so fast you couldn't understand what was being said. It stayed at that accelerated speed for the entire journey, only slowing to normal as I said, "I'm now back in the chamber in present time." My client had no Egyptian heritage, nor was his past life session associated with Egypt. Why did I end up in a mysterious chamber under the Sphinx? What happened to distort the recording? Though I walk there often, no matter how tidy my explanation, there's much about the underworld I do not understand. I have many more questions than answers. Hopefully our next guest can answer some of these questions for us. Our guest this hour, Freddy Silva, is a best-selling author of many books, including his latest, The Lost Art of Resurrection, Initiation, Secret Chambers, and The Quest for the Otherworld. He's an independent researcher of ancient systems of knowledge, alternative history, and earth mysteries. Freddy is a documentary filmmaker, magazine contributor, and conducts tours to sacred sites. After this commercial break, I'll introduce Freddy, and together, we're bound to rock some other worlds, so don't go away. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Prior innovative episodes can always be found on our website, thescienceofmagic.net.
This is Kevin Randall. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long, strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at www.drgibbswilliams.com.
Shamanism is recognized as a method to access the quantum level. Mastery of shamanic skills puts spiritual information and healing power into your hands. Path Home Shamanic Art School, a bonded Colorado certified occupational school, has met rigorous state standards ensuring its director and instructors have the qualifications to teach the shamanic arts. Path Home offers its certification program in blocks of study. Block 1, a 5-day intensive, will be held in the beautiful mountain town of Coaldale, Colorado, October 13th through 18th. Registration deadline is September 12th. Experience journey trance, power animals, helping spirits, sacred space, and life purpose. Come discover your power. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, in the magical world of shamanism. Call 303-775-3431 or visit findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is the Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour, Freddy Silva, independent researcher of ancient systems of knowledge, alternative history, earth mysteries, and best-selling author. His latest book, The Lost Art of Resurrection. Freddy's website, invisibletemple.com. Freddy, thank you for joining us on the Science of Magic.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Gwilda.
I have to ask, what started your personal quest for the Otherworld?
It was really based on a couple of decades of research into sacred sites. I mean, we already know that a lot of the ancient temples are astronomical markers. They vectored the Earth's energy and ground them to those locations. But what I was coming across was concepts of certain rooms, certain restricted chambers, and some specific sites themselves, where the legends, the local myths, the recent stories were all telling about a secret initiation that took place there. And that's what got me very excited, because wherever I traveled in the world, whether it was in Egypt, in some of the chambers at Edfu, for example, in Europe, in Britain, and also in America as well, some of the Native American cultures in the Native American Southwest, even in Peru, they talked about a special ritual whereby there was a kind of an out-of-body experience that was achieved by certain initiates, where they actually had complete knowledge of the other world, and they came back to be declared risen from the dead. And I found it rather unusual that, having been brought in the Western religious tradition, the concept of risen from the dead, of course, applies to one person and one person only. And that's why I wanted to go deeper into this story, and also to find out how, if this was associated purely with shamanism, or whether there was something unique about it, because the people that went through this experience very clearly stated that it was an induced near-death experience, and that does not sound like shamanism at all. And when they crossed over to the other side, sometimes anywhere between 3 and 7 days, they were totally aware of what was going on, as much as you and I would be if you're walking down a street or going to a supermarket. They had complete memory of what they saw, who they talked to, and they were able to engage with beings much like ourselves and ask some very serious questions. Some of them were very great philosophers that actually undertook this journey, and they came back and they said that they shaped their complete philosophical doctrine and gave them a sense of self-empowerment. And I thought, that's a story worth pursuing. I can't think of anything more empowering today than discovering something where you discover more about yourself.
Boy, isn't that the truth. You know, as I hear you talking, well, one thing, there are some nasty shamanic initiations, as I'm sure you know. Do you have a shamanic background?
I don't, but I have had the experience of crossing over several times without actually asking for it or even looking for it. It seems to be part of what I call the fringe benefits of my work in looking into the origins of sacred space in general. And so I have gotten a sense of what it's like, and believe me, it really has no bearing on shamanism in terms of, most shamanism is used to induce visions. It's a sort of a vehicle to get you in contact with the other world, and of course there are variations of that depending on your level of experience. And but what these people were saying, and even people like Plato and Pythagoras, which are not names you tend to associate with shamanism, they were saying that this differed very, very much, because it literally was an induced near-death experience. People were literally almost flatlined for several days, and that's what made me wonder what was going on here. This is obviously something very, very different, because they obviously did this in complete control.
Got it. So, again, as you're speaking, this is bringing to mind something that I'm just going to be kind of vague about, because I'm vague about it. But our first president, George Washington, belonged to a society, something to do with rainbows. And there's paintings of him on ceilings around rainbows. And this was also associated, some people have made the connection with the way Jesus ascended or was resurrected. And it has to do with being put into almost a near-death state, but then it has to do with a lot of light coming out of the physical body. Have you heard of anything like that? that, or is this similar?
It's mostly symbolic, of course. I mean, George Washington was, of course, a Freemason, and the point of contact there with the association is that there were the Freemasons in the 18th century and forward from there, because Freemasonry is actually much, much older. It goes back to the 14th century in Scotland. But if you happen to take a look at the third degree, it does involve a candidate being figuratively risen from a symbolic grave, whereupon his or her blindfold are removed because they're being given access to certain privileged information, and now they can see the light, obviously. And this, of course, turns them into people who are much more aware of their physical selves in this lifetime, and that's, of course, when you develop your quote, rainbow body, you are much more aware of what's around you. And so in terms of symbolism, it makes a lot of sense. But if you trace that ritual of the Freemasons all the way back to their originators, who were the Knights Templar, the candidates joined an inner brotherhood, and they went to a ritual chamber for several days. They came back, and they were pronounced risen from the dead. And if you look at the Templars' practices 1,000 years earlier, they are identical to the Essenes. And, of course, Jesus was part of that movement. He had learnt his methods of resurrection from them. And this is called the living resurrection at the time by them, because no one ever physically died and got back to life again. I mean, it was actually a misnomer that was recreated by the Catholic Church. But the Essenes themselves also borrowed their privilege all the way back to the Chinese in 3000 BC, and they called it by the same method, which is called the Way. And we should portray the people who went through this initiation as having a kind of rainbow body, just to symbolize the fact that these people, and somehow their force field, if you like, their aura was much more defined than normal people, who are actually called the dead.
I knew you'd have an answer for me. Would you mind defining the other world?
Well, the other world is basically a level of reality that's parallel to ours. In fact, the Egyptians wrote about this extensively in many of the chambers that they actually use for this specific ritual, because there's a sarcophagus in these chambers and there's no body inside it. Even when the chambers were found sealed, there was no body in the sarcophagus, and the person for whom these places were built were found sometimes as much as a mile away in some other temple. And they make very clear that this parallel universe is almost exactly like ours, except that no one has a physical body like we do. And they recognize it as being no different to the present world. It's coexistent. It's a place from where all forms come from into the material. And when the material forms disengage from this world, it's the place where they go back to. So they treated it as a place that's very, very real, much like ours, just a different station along the dial. So we can accept that we live in a very physical universe. At 88 FM, for them, it was literally just stepping up your resonance in a manner which has not survived. We don't know much about that technique. It was highly censored by the church whenever they found it. So we can only guess at it as to the technique that they used to cross into this parallel universe and literally raise their radio station to 95 FM. But they actually did treat the whole thing as not being part of your imagination or a shamanic journey. They recognized it for what it was, a parallel universe.
You know, that's the way I've studied shamanism for a long time, and probably am using it in a more evolved way than where you begin. But the one thing that I have discovered is, like you said, shamanism is a vehicle, but it's a matter of raising your frequency or an organized set of rituals to help you raise your frequency so you can access and interpret what's going on at those higher frequencies. But they exist. They're right there. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the big question that I also asked when I was writing this book and doing the research. When I was in the Yucatan, they actually still are practicing a very ancient Egyptian tradition using exactly the same symbolism. And in fact, you've got to wonder, what is a 5,000-year-old ritual doing in Yucatan when it should be in Egypt? And again, they do make a parallel distinction about crossing over into this otherworld reality in a shamanic state. But there's a different initiation that they also know about, which is much more serious, much more stringent, and it does involve a 3-year period of observation, of trial, and they won't let you anywhere near the actual ritual chamber in which to practice this unusual ritual until you are absolutely prepared. And they say, well, anybody can really do shamanism. I mean, it's become a tourist tradition. If you want to be a serious shaman, as you will very well know, obviously you have to go a little bit deeper into it. There are certain protocols, and there is a method of responsibility that you have to have. And it's the way you do the shamanic experience is to use it as a kind of vehicle to access the other world. But that's where the parallels stop. From here on, all the inner the mystery secret schools talk about something that's parallel to shamanism, but very different, a very different experience altogether.
It was like jumping on the platform, but not getting on the train.
Just a long. I think it's kind of like being on a train, but you then cross over to the next platform, and you're in a completely different environment. And it is fascinating because I thought the two things were the same thing, but clearly they overlap. But they're not. But there are also people, of course, in certain parts of the world, in certain shamanic traditions, that do also say that, if you do this long enough, just like learning how to drive a car, it becomes very automatic, and you do develop a certain sense of control over your desired method of achieving a shamanic state. But again, they do point out that there's something else which is not really revealed to most people, and it implies that there is another level of shamanic state which gets us into the realm of the living resurrection ritual.
Absolutely. And that's I think what's little known about a lot of these things is that we're just scratching the surface, but underneath are hidden mysteries that get us to a place that I think is becoming increasingly more accessible in this time. Do you?
Yes and no. We're certainly in need of reconnecting with the elemental world. All you have to do is walk down 5 minutes outside your house and watch people bumping into lampposts, staring at their cell phones, or getting run over in the middle of green lights. They don't even know whether the traffic is running into them. For the first time in history, we have lost our God-given ability to connect with the natural world, much more so than ever. And it's a scary time, and I think it's a moment where we do have come to a crossroads where we do need whatever method we choose to try and access that level of reality. And it could be from sitting in a garden to climbing a mountain to obviously doing a real shamanic tradition. In fact, people have actually asked me this many times I go and speak at presentations, and I said the same thing, that there are places around the world where there's still practice this living resurrection ritual. But you'll have to travel quite far in order to find them. And even in the American Southwest, if you bump into the right people at the right time and they take you in confidence, I'm sure you do get shown that there are still these practices being done. But if you look at this from a legal point of view, obviously the powers that be would not like you to perform this, because they said it was a very dangerous procedure. People could actually die, and it was a high level of initiation whereby the priests and the priestesses who were involved did have to undergo a lot of training, and they were not allowed to slip up on any part of the actual protocol.
We're going to have to take a break, but on the other side, I really want to go back into this living resurrection. Freddie and I will return to our discussion after this commercial break. You're listening to The Science of Magic in the land of all things paranormal on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Previous broadcasts of thought-provoking episodes can always be found on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. We will be back, so don't you go away.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey Kay, and every minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, new age, thought-provoking, sci-fi radio programming 24/7, 365.
Wouldn't you love to know the secret to everything? Well then, meet Dr. Kimberly McGeorge and her cutting-edge breakthrough knowledge that combines science with possibility. Dr. Kimberly brings real-life answers and healing to those open to alternative solutions. She teaches solution-based programs and classes that will change all areas of your life forever. Specializing in conscious creation, intuitive readings, and energy medicine, you can rapidly shift health, relationships, business, and money and abundance challenges quickly. Receive her best-selling book, Secret to Everything, at no cost by going to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone. That's right, transformation can start now. Just go to secrettoeverything.com/X-Zone and receive Dr. Kimberly's book for free.
While science pursues fact, magic accesses the quantum level, bridging random facts to form truth. As long as science and magic remain separate and polarized, the truth cannot be known. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Join me on the Science of Magic radio program, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. During each episode, I'll be speaking with experienced and respected scientists and mystics. From astrologers to astronomers, from medical doctors to shaman, the scientific method to dowsing and intuition, we'll weave together information from seemingly divergent practices to promote unity and enlightenment. Join me, Gwilda Wiyaka, and the Science of Magic right here on the Mutual Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.thescienceofmagic.net.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
Welcome back. This is the Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Freddy Silva, best-selling author of The Lost Art of Resurrection, Initiation, Secret Chambers, and The Quest for the Otherworld. Freddy, we were talking about that death and resurrection, where it's almost physical but not quite, and how some of the priests and priestesses really were required to do this in order to perform what they did. Can you go into that more?
Yeah, it took as much as 10 years for you to learn the craft. And in fact, if I can draw from the Babylonian method, from which John the Baptist was actually a person who learned his craft, Originally, you'd have to basically join. You have to become a natural candidate to go into the mystery schools, which basically formed the society apart. And if they gauged that you were kind of a responsible fellow, they would allow you into the inner brotherhood, which of course included women as well. It wasn't gender specific. And that's where you learned your craft. And eventually, after you learned certain cosmic truths, you then underwent the final ritual in something called the bridal chamber, where you literally had a near-death experience. You crossed over into the other world for several days. At one point, there's even a story of a man in Persia who did it for 7 days. And he comes back and he becomes an initiate. But then he also goes on to be an adept and teaches the method to others. So this took on as much as 10 years of understanding about the use of narcotics, for example, certain poisons as well, which could be administered in a specific dose, which does bring your pulse down to a certain point where you're barely alive. And I think that was part of the secret of the method. And I did read up about on some of the remaining practices that survived, and it said that if any priest or priestess slipped up on any part of the ritual and the candidate came back either too early or in a dead state, they obviously would be made to either atone for about a year, and then in serious cases they would actually be kicked out of the brotherhood. So they were very, very serious about this. And as I said, the original priests in the Babylonian era were called it Naziru, which means a preserver of divine secrets, which gives you an idea of what these people went to the other world to find. And this term, Naziru, eventually morphs into the Nazarai, which are the priests of the same tradition who basically were living in the time of Jesus. And of course, one of them was Jesus, and the other one was John the Baptist. And which brings us to the whole point of the misnomer about Jesus of Nazareth. It's actually not quite correct. He was actually a Nazarite, which meant that he did not come from Nazareth, because Nazareth didn't really exist back in his day. But he was obviously qualified as a priest who could administer the highest level of initiation, which was called the living resurrection. And it was presided in something called the bridal chamber, where the initiate went out of body and married a divine bride, which in every single culture in the world I can find is essentially the epitome of wisdom itself. And this wisdom, which resides in the darkness of the other world, was epitomized by a woman, and sometimes a very voluptuous woman, if we go back to about 8,000 BC. So she was the classic sort of goddess of the universe, with whom resided everything. And she was the one person that all the initiates wanted to wed with this very bizarre ritual.
Interesting. So, as I understand it, Jesus studied in the Library of Alexandria. I didn't know that he was actually a priest in this format, which brings another interesting thing. Some information that I've gotten indicated that indeed he set up the entire crucifixion to reenact a prophecy in order to send the information forward, and that when he was calling for water and the guard gave him a sponge with supposedly vinegar on it, there's some suspect that it was actually something else that put him into a very near death-like state. Have you heard of anything like that, or can you comment on it?
Yes, in fact, a gentleman who did some excellent research on this, the late Michael Bagent, who actually helped me to understand a lot about this process, wrote a great book about it, and I'm damned if I can remember the title, but I think it was one of his last works. He actually got puzzled about the whole resurrection thing, and in a nutshell, he said the whole thing had been arranged between Pontius Pilate and Joseph of Arimathea, who was a very influential man of his period. And the thing that really sort of bothered him about the whole Catholic version of events, which, by the way, all Gnostic Christians opposed originally. They said that the crucifixion did not actually occur, and this is actually written in the Gospel of Thomas, which, of course, was banned by the Church. The Gospel of Philip, beg your pardon, which is banned by the Church, and he states quite categorically that the resurrection just did not happen, the crucifixion did not happen. They were supposed to be metaphors of an ancient tradition, because if you look at the tradition of the god-man Mithra from Babylon and Sumeria, if you take the word Mithra out and you put Jesus in, it's exactly the same story. So Jesus is a real person, was an initiate who's basically following a very old ritual tradition. Now, he broke no Roman law. So obviously he could not actually be crucified by the Romans. It was the Jews who wanted to crucify him because he was trying to claim that the temple of God resides within everyone. You don't actually have to go and talk to a priest to be an intermediary, and that's where the problems, of course, occur. So Joseph of Arimathea organized to have a fake crucifixion. He is given the vinegar by Mary Magdalene, who was a high priestess of the temple. And basically, he was made to look like he actually died, and the nearest witnesses were a quarter of a mile away. And I can tell you, when you're in a desert climate, a quarter of a mile away, with the shimmering coming off the desert floor, especially in Jerusalem, you can see anything. So there was a mock crucifixion, but then, of course, because Jesus was a marked man from that point on, and Mary Magdalene was carrying his child inside him, they obviously had to be made to disappear, and of course the rest is history, where Jesus disappears supposedly to India to live till arrive at the age of 80, and Mary Magdalene ends up in the south of France, and her progeny continue to this day.
It's just amazing, isn't it? And a lot of people, when they hear that story, they say, well, you're belittling or defiling the history of Christ. And to me, it makes him just that much more of an amazing person to have the kind of foresight that involved. Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, if you actually look at all the people who were being murdered by the church at the time, including Gnostic Christians, and I thought, what did they all have in common? And that's what they all have in common. They all said, no, they've taken the concept of the resurrection and the crucifixion as a literal event. They're confusing a spiritual truth with an actual event. The two are not the same. And Philip, the apostle, actually goes on to criticize fundamental Christians or Christianity as the faith of fools. So no wonder this gospel gets banned. They knew something that was symbolic of an incredibly important ritual that made you into an extraordinary person. And of course, the church was saying the complete opposite, that the whole thing was basically done by the special God-man, and it only applies to him. And if you want to be kind of like him, you have to go through us to talk to God. That's against what Jesus was saying. So I actually find that the information is actually much more empowering, and it gives early Christianity greater emphasis than it's been given today.
It's amazing, and then it kind of rewrites the life of Judas, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. It rewrites everything. I mean, even the Muslims were saying exactly the same thing, and they have a high reference for Jesus in the Quran. And again, they also agree that the whole thing was made up, that people thought that the whole event had actually happened for real, but it actually never did. They crucified another guy called Simon of Cyrene, which is also in one of the Gnostic Gospels, of course. But here's a nutshell, is the fact that early Christianity, the Essenes, Buddhism, all of those faiths all have a lot in common, and it was all to do with the empowering of the individual by having this otherworld experience where they came back totally aware of a different reality that basically made them into almost superhumans, because they realized the world is not finite. It's not bookended by birth, a difficult life, and death. There's actually much more going on, and we are an integral part of the physical world, as well as having a foot in the next world at the same time. And if you can ride the two, which the Egyptians did very well, and they wrote a lot about this, if you're able to ride the invisible world and the other world while you're living here on Earth, now that makes you into a God-man. It makes you a person who's totally in control over the laws of nature. And that's ultimately why they did this.
So I found it really interesting that towards the end, the Egyptians started intermarrying to keep a royal bloodline. How does that royal bloodline relate to this particular initiation and abilities?
It was, as far as I can tell, it was sort of running parallel, and here you have to go back to at least 4000 BC with a very ancient culture called the Scythians, who apparently preceded the Egyptian culture, and did around the Black Sea. They followed a ritual of living resurrection, for which they built these enormous mounds with big entrances that looked like the mouths of gaping beasts, as though you're supposed to go in there and be dismembered, which of course was the whole point. You had to be defleshed if you wanted to cross to the other world while you're alive, because it makes the whole ritual so much easier. And they basically had this divine bloodline, which was part human, part divine. You could talk about a giant culture that preceded the Great Flood, or aliens, if you want to go that far. We just don't know. But they obviously were very different, because when they intermixed with humans, it gave them certain supernatural powers where a lot of them were credited with being extraordinary leaders, healers, great architects, and visionaries. And people had the ability to see far and had extraordinary telepathic ability. So they kept this bloodline very pure by intermarrying, and the matriarchal line, of course, carried the mitochondrial DNA within their blood. So it's very important to keep that bloodline very pure by intermarriage, and that was the reason why they intermarried. On Earth, that has its problems, whereby your DNA starts getting very, very messed up, and that's why they basically fell apart. But that bloodline eventually runs into Europe with the Merovingian families up until about the 10th century, before the church basically imposed its own system, and they've been fighting to get a stronghold of Europe ever since. But certainly there was a divine bloodline, and they wanted, part of their technique was to maintain this ability to function consciously in two worlds at the same time, and show others that they too could do it.
Yeah, and you look at the Egyptian paintings, and it's very consistent that they don't look totally human. The enlarged back of the head, tall, hammer toes, all that stuff. It does speak of some other in there, doesn't it?
It really does, and I mean, Akhenaten was, and Tutankhamun, of course, were the last of that bloodline in Egypt, and by then they're getting seriously deformed, because there's only so far you can take that in the physical world, and that's, if you look at the ancient stories from India and Egypt and compare them to a time of a great flood, which we can now date to 9,703 BC, and very accurately so. This was a time of giant people, very tall people, and they were very divine, apparently. They were very pure. They were able to really have control over the laws of nature. But, of course, after this big cataclysm happened where the Earth was hit by the 7 fragments of a comet that hit us very, very hard, the survivors had to interbreed with humans, and that's where the problem started going downhill for the next 6,000 years. It took quite a while, but at that point they talk about this group of people who are half human, half divine, still very tall, sometimes as much as 15 feet, according to some of the Egyptian texts, and according to some of the skeletons that have been found around the world, including where I come from in England. We still have giants' graves. You can go and visit them any time.
We're going to have to pick this up on the other side again. Freddie and I will be back on the flip side of this commercial break.
So
we're coming to you through the leading edge of ever-expanding X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. This is the Science of Magic, the place where altruistic professionals of science and the esoteric create common ground for the betterment of our world. You can always listen to previous transformative broadcasts on our website, our gift to you, thescienceofmagic.net.
As host of Dialogue with Divinity, I am thrilled to join the X-Zone Broadcast Network and their growing number of affiliates. My quest for a connection to the divine ignited my successful career path as an international spiritual counselor for over 40 years, an author of 4 books, and well-known metaphysical educator. My clients call me their spiritual mama. So my job is to offer you a radio show to help you grow spiritually with wisdom and get specific tools from guests who are experts in their field. Tune in to Dialogue with Divinity and be part of the conversation with Spirit. My goal, your happy soul. For more information, please visit my website at johannacarroll.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey Kay, and every minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, new age, thought-provoking, sci-fi radio programming 24/7, 365.
Coming soon to the X-Zone Broadcast Network is A Different Perspective with me, Kevin Randall, as your host. We'll be taking a close look at what is happening in the world of UFOs today with side trips into the paranormal. Guests will range from those who are household names to those who have a different perspective on a variety of topics. No topic will be taboo, but there will be tough questions asked as we all search for the truth about UFOs, the paranormal, and those things that excite us. Sometimes we'll agree with a guest and sometimes we won't, but we'll try to keep the program topical. For those of you who would like to read, be sure to visit www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com and remember to listen to the other fine programs on the X-Zone Broadcast Network at www.xzbn.net. This is Kevin Randall. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long, strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com.
What happened in Benghazi is revealed by Nicholas Genix, author of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. He informs the American people that President Obama deceived them by advocating a strong foreign policy prior to the 2012 presidential election, and Hillary Clinton supported this deception. As the title infers, there is a connection between Obama, Islam, and Benghazi. Ample evidence informs Americans that Obama's early indoctrination in the Quran developed an affinity for Islam, why the Quran is the source of discontent in many countries, and why the Obama foreign policy deception led to poor military action and caused the loss of American lives in Benghazi. Genix provides 36 questions for the Select Committee on Benghazi to validate if Americans are justified to mistrust President Obama and Hillary Clinton. An overview of Obama, Islam, and Benghazi is presented on the website www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Afterlife expert Roberta Grimes was the first one to say that dying can be fun. Now her best-selling book, The Fun of Dying, is available in stores worldwide. So if you wonder whether death ends life, how it feels to die, or what heaven might be like, The Fun of Dying was written for you. And if you have always been afraid of death, or if you worry that your life has no meaning, let The Fun of Dying ease your fears and bring new meaning to your life. Nothing said in The Fun of Dying is based on the teachings of any religion. Instead, Roberta draws on evidence to explain how death happens, how it feels, and what comes next. A lot of the best death-related evidence was produced in the first half of the 20th century. When it is put together with recent discoveries, it tells a consistent and amazing story. Roberta Grimes blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Her wonderful book, The Fun of Dying, is available on Amazon and at stores worldwide wherever books are sold.
Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, bringing together gifted people of service to the world. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Freddy Silva, best-selling author of The Lost Art of Resurrection, Initiation, Secret Chambers, and The Quest for the Otherworld. Freddy, let's talk about chambers. What do you know about chambers?
A lot. I'm actually about to take a group to a couple of them at the end of the week in Peru. Part of what I find fascinating is that when I open up this can of worms, is how much I'm now finding this stuff all around the world, and I hadn't expected to find the resurrection rituals in Peru of all places. What I did find was the fact that some of these chambers go back thousands of years. They have nothing to do with the Inca. The Inca basically just preserved what was already there from a long time ago. And there's a couple of places specifically which pretty much typify what goes on in other places around the world. And one of them is just above the city of Cusco, the navel of the earth, one of many. And there's a chamber called Kenko, which is basically someone took a very large limestone boulder the size of a very, very large mansion and literally hollowed it out from the inside. And the entrance faces the equinox sunset, which is the traditional direction of the entrance into the Otherworld. And there's a cave-like structure inside. There's a kind of altar, a place where you could spend a very comfortable few days in an animated state, and then the exit curves out again to a beautiful courtyard, and again facing the equinox sunrise, which in every tradition around the world is always the resurrection position, where the candidate sees the balance of night and day, greets the star of the morning, which is usually either the sun or the hierarchical rising of Venus or Sirius. And it's interesting that in many of these places you see that specific rocks and even entire sides of hills have been surgically cut in order to allow a view of Venus rising just before the sunrise. So we find that in Kenko and also at Sacsayhuaman, north of Cusco, but also in ritual chambers, which are called chulpas. And there are these magnificent towers which border what once used to be Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world at 15,000 feet. And believe me, it's hard to breathe up there. And back then, when the water level is much higher, the mesa on where these chulpas are positioned used to form an island. Now, it's funny that in every other world tradition around the world, they talk about the journey of the initiate going to an island in the west. And indeed, it would have formed an island in the west side of Lake Titicaca. And I made a bet with people who I take on these groups, and I said, I've studied this a lot, and but this is my first time here, and I will bet that all the entrances to these chulpas are aligned exactly to the equinox sunrise, and the inside, which you won't know until you get there, they're shaped like beehives, which is the traditional shape for the bridal chamber for a lot of reasons. And sure enough, we get there, and you have to crawl inside this tiny, tiny little entrance where there's a big stone plug which fits in just enough to allow a tiny bit of air to go inside the actual tower, which makes you wonder why we leave that gap of air, because it would allow rodents to go in and eat the body, which defeats the purpose of the exercise. So it turns out they are facing the equinox sunrise, and yes, the insides are shaped like beehives. And interestingly, you get exactly the same designs in Anatolia and in Turkey. And the priestesses that from that particular part of the world who used to attend the initiate when he or she was out of body, they actually were called bees because they used to hum around the body of the person in a near-death state to prevent any spirits from coming into your body that would basically try to take it over. So they were kind of creating a protective force field around the initiate. So it's funny how all of these chambers have very similar designs, very similar stories all around the world.
Yeah, it is amazing. And have you, before we get too far here, would you mind telling people where they can find your books and services and what you have coming next?
Oh, absolutely. You can spend a lifetime on my website, which is invisibletemple.com, which, of course, tells you exactly what's important, because it's the invisible temple that's so much more important than the real stuff.
Fantastic. And everything you're going on a tour here soon, did you say?
Yeah, we got 16 people going to Peru this weekend, and next year I'm taking people to a lot of the chambers in England, in the southern England, and also to Scotland. Hopefully I'm going to try and squeeze in Wales in there at some point, and maybe go back to Peru again. So it's I've been on tour for something like 15 years now, and there's never a dull moment. And people, when they come back from these sites, they're not the same when they went. Something has changed inside them, and they begin to realize that there is something very unusual about these sacred sites, which does turn you into a very extraordinary person. You get to sort of realize who you really are, that you're actually much more powerful than you've been led to believe, and I'd say that was a pretty good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how those ancient sites can still hook us up to what we've disconnected from. Have you noticed, seasons change and so do we, that the equinox sunset and sunrises fall slightly differently? Has that affected these chambers at all?
The equinox still falls pretty much where it used to be. It's usually pretty much dead on 90 degrees east. Depending on where you are on the planet, there's about 5-degree variation. It's the solstices that are the problem.
Well, it looks like either we lost Freddy to the chambers of initiation or we're having trouble with his line. However, there's going to be something special for you. Join me next week, Gwilda Wiyaka, on the Science of Magic. Welcome to the Stairway to Heaven, a weekly update on the ever-changing high-frequency currents now bathing the planet and affecting us all. The source of vital information for the evolving human being. We're coming to you through the leader in paranormal, new age, spiritual, and alternative science programming, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. The Evil Fomorians. All shamanic cultures recognize the power of performing ceremony during a time of year supporting the intention of the rite. The Celtic season of Samhain marks the end of a growing season. A festival of harvest is held from October 31st through November 1st, while Samhain's season is November 1st through January 31st. Samhain is also the Celtic New Year and considered to be the end of the light half of the year. Traditionally a time of inward turning and contemplation, Samhain is associated with the coming of death and remembrance of the ancestors. It's considered the time when the veil between realities, the land of the living and that of spirit, are thinnest. Samhain was the predecessor of our current celebration of Halloween, or All Hallows' Eve, characterized by ghouls, goblins, and things that go bump in the night. Due to the thinning of veils and the sorting and discerning properties of the harvest, it's the best time of year to engage the battle of the evil Fomorians. The Irish Celtic mythology, the Fomorians were believed to be the gods of chaos and wild nature. They inhabited Ireland in ancient times and were considered a semi-divine race. Fomorians were thought to be demonic, prehistoric giants who raided and pillaged Ireland. One of my favorite Celtic shamanic teachers, Tom Cowan, explains the myth of the evil Fomorians from a shamanic perspective as demons created from our half-formed dreams, wishes, and intents. These unmanifested, unprocessed wishes and goals, left to their own devices, tie up our creative power and compromise our frequency. This leaves us vulnerable to plague and misfortune as individuals and as a community. Every All Hallows' Eve, it's the sacred duty of every good Celtic shaman to battle the evil Fomorians in order to protect their communities from plague and misfortune the following year. The modern-day battle of the Fomorians is a ceremony whereby trained shamanic practitioners come together and, through combined intent, dismantle the tied-up energy. This frees power to be repurposed and used to manifest for the future. We've been conditioned to be consumers. It's easy to idly wish and dream for things, totally unaware that we're actually using our personal power on the quantum level to set our intent into motion. Believing ourselves powerless, we don't follow up on our creations, nor do we bother aborting them, dissolving the old structure and reclaiming our power. We don't recognize the things that show up as a result of our original intention, providing the raw materials to create our wishes. Therefore, we don't take advantage of them, nor do we go back and free up our energy should we decide the original wish is no longer something we wish to pursue. Life becomes complicated by the proverbial too many irons in the fire with nothing getting hot. Passing fancies tie up energy and resources when the spiritual aspect of our intent is not managed. This situation eloquently demonstrates how unconscious we are in the use of personal power. It shows how it happens when we fail to honor the expansion and contraction of life. Breathe in and release, creation and destruction. We're so programmed to forever seek more, we actually ensure our inability to manifest. The Celtic season of Samhain is an excellent time to review the things we've wished for or tried to create in the past year and reevaluate if they still deserve our zeal. If not, we can simply intend to remove and reclaim personal energy that's still tied up in the project. Conscious management of personal power is the key to an abundant and healthy life. An individual, family, or community can greatly benefit from deeply examining what's being considered for creation in order to discern if it's worth the investment of personal power and energy. By closely scrutinizing our wants, we can begin to recognize consumer programming rather than true need or desire. Once a worthy goal has been established, keeping a journal of what we initiate is a powerful way to anchor our intent. It also provides a great reference during Samhain to reevaluate and release what no longer deserves our energy, freeing our power to manifest anew. Thank you for joining me, Gwilda Wiyaka, on the Stairway to Heaven, where we provide updates on the energetic currents facilitating our evolution into conscious, powerful co